Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am wrapping up my reading for the month of July. This was a very successful reading month for me, and you will see as the video goes on that I read quite a lot of poetry collections this month and finished them. So the majority of my reading this month is going to be poetry. Starting out with a book called Couplets by Maggie Millner. This is one that I picked up when I was secondhand shopping. I want to say it was either at the beginning of this year or last year. So I haven't had this one for too long. I was honestly drawn to the green colour of it, and I flicked it open in the bookshop and was like, yeah, this sounds interesting. So I decided to pick it up. Unfortunately, I did not love this collection. It was fine. So couplets are like two lines of poetry that rhyme. And this is the majority of the poems in here, and I'll just give you an example, set out in this way where it is couplets that rhyme. And I have to say that in that format and with the style, like the content of the poetry in this book, to me sometimes the adherence to that form inhibited the flow of the poems and the conveying the information. Sometimes I was able to sort of like forget about the rhyme scheme, but sometimes, most of the time, it was sort of so like right there that it actually inhibited the flow. So I think the poet was trying to achieve a sort of more modern poetry, like a sort of non-rhyming poetry style, modern style of poetry writing, but using the couplet form. And to me, sometimes that worked, but most of the time it felt like it was being pulled in too many directions, unfortunately. So there were definitely a few standout poems in here, but yeah, I just really found the structure and rhyme scheme to be distracting rather than enhancing for the poems. So yeah, it was a little bit disappointing, but that is what it is, and we move on with our lives. The next book that I read, I don't have a copy of because it's one that I borrowed from the library, and it is Anything is Possible by Elizabeth Strout. This is the second book in the, technically the series is called the Amgash series, but the first book is it's the second book in the Lucy Barton series. So the first one was My Name is Lucy Barton, which I read earlier this year, and this one was the second one. So I quite enjoyed this. To me, this felt more like interconnected short stories about the sort of townsfolk of Amgash in Illinois, which is a made-up town. It's not a real place. I know because I looked it up. Not a real place, but it's sort of meant to be like a kind of somewhat country town vibe. And so you get that kind of small town, everybody is connected to everybody kind of vibe from these interconnected short stories. So, and also there are throwbacks to some of the things that are mentioned in My Name is Lucy Barton. And there was one story that featured her, like she gets referenced, Lucy Barton gets referenced in quite a few of the stories, either directly or indirectly. And there's one where she's actually there in the story, and this is one of the stories about her brother. And yeah, like it was really, really interesting. It wasn't what I was expecting, I guess, having read My Name is Lucy Barton. Like it's quite different to that. But the writing is good, and I generally really got along with this book. One area though that I really could have done without, there were several stories actually that included fat phobia, and I think there's something to be said for the possibility that she's trying to kind of like convey how a person might be thinking about themselves or about other people and what that means about them. But to me, that wasn't clearly stated enough to separate it from the possibility that it's actually just what Elizabeth Strout thinks about fat people, as opposed to her creating this character. It seems to be, so the characters who are fat in the story, like the stories are directly dealing with the fact that they're fat in most cases. Like it's an element of the story, and how people are treating them poorly because of it. And then on the flip side of that, there's a couple of stories where people are talking about these characters who are fat and what that says about them as people, the fact that they're fat. And I don't like that sort of thing as a fat person. It's also not my experience of the world. Like there of course have been a few times in my life where people have spoken to me directly about being fat, but I genuinely, like, it's not a defining factor of who I am as a person and how I exist in the world, in the sense of like I'm just a regular person that does regular things, and it honestly doesn't come up that often in my life, unless there's something very directly about being fat is the focus of it. So like it just, to me, and look, different people have different experiences, and maybe that's what it's like in America. I don't know. I don't live there, but certainly it's made more of in this book than I believe it would be in real life, if that makes sense. So anyway, to me, that sort of knocks a bit of the wind out of my sails in gushing about this book. I gave it 4 stars. I did genuinely find the book very enjoyable, and I think the writing is quite good, but I think we could just do without the fat phobia. The story didn't need it, in my opinion. Okay, the next one is a very long-term read that I started back in January and finally finished in the month of July, and that is Tide by Hugh Aldersey-Williams. This is, as you can imagine, and I'll tell you the subtitle is The Science and Law of the Greatest Force on Earth. This is a book about tides. It did what it said on the tin. That is what it is. So there were lots of different perspectives on this topic. So obviously we're talking about it from a geographical point of view and a experience point of view, like observation and things like that, a science point of view, obviously, but then also kind of going into literature as well, the history that we know, like where there have been examples of tides talked about in historical records, and the effect, the way that people have interacted with the tide over time. I think all of those kind of aspects of things were quite interesting to me. The observation chapters as well, to me, were probably the most interesting, because he sort of gets into the like minute details of like what he's observing at different points of the tide coming in and out, and that was super interesting to me. However, I think maybe the scope was too broad, or maybe it was just it didn't move quickly enough. I kind of got a bit lost in the woods, or lost in the water, as the case may be. But I think the scope may have been too broad, because I found myself needing to slog through some of the chapters, unfortunately. And I am pleased that I am now done. I didn't dislike the book as a whole, but I gave it 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favourite read of the year, but I did learn some things about the tide, and I think if it is something that you want to learn more about, this book definitely has a good overview of all of those, from all of those different perspectives, and if that's what you're looking for, this could be the book for you. All right, the next book that I read was a short story collection, and that was Antarctica by Claire Keegan. I have read a couple of Claire Keegan's novellas, including Small Things Like These, which I thought was excellent. This is a doozy of a short story collection, and this is from her backlist. So although this is a modern reprint, this actually was originally came out in 1999, so quite some time ago. And I actually listened to this on audio, and it was read by a couple of different narrators depending on the story. And that was interesting. So my first caveat on this book is I don't really like a disturbing story, and this is a spoiler, so just block your ears for a moment. The very first short story ends up being a disturbing story, and it doesn't, you're not sure that it's going to go that direction from the outset, but then as you get towards the end of the story, it's clear that it's about to become more disturbing, and then it becomes very disturbing. And that was in some ways quite shocking to me. Like, it wasn't what I was expecting at all. Having read some of Claire Keegan's more modern stuff, like, I wouldn't say, I think the kind of the genius of Claire Keegan is in her observation of like subtlety and like minute details of life, and you know, there might be some kind of like dark elements to the stories that she writes, but like that's not, the darkness is not so much the focus of it. It's like how people deal with that, like how they kind of come to terms with the darkness, and like, you know, how they respond. Whereas some of these stories were just quite dark and disturbing. Also, several of them use the N-word, which to me felt unnecessary. But I wondered if perhaps it was a reflection of the time in which it was written, as opposed to, you know, like, I don't know that Claire Keegan would include the N-word in her writing now, but maybe back in 1999, like, it wasn't as clear a distinction that, like, that wasn't something that white people should be doing. So in the audiobook, at the beginning of, there was maybe 2 stories, possibly 3, where that, I think it was just 2, where that happened. And the narrator at the beginning of that story gave a warning that was going to be in it, because the audiobook was created more recently. It wasn't created back in 1999. So I appreciated that there was a warning at the beginning of those stories. Yeah, but to me, it didn't feel super necessary. Like, we could have done without it. And yeah, I think though, otherwise the writing is otherwise good, but as a collection of short stories, there wasn't much holding them together, I would say. So this was not my favourite Claire Keegan book. I think we can quite categorically say. I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, like, Claire Keegan's writing comes through, like the quality of her writing comes through. But yeah, I think given that this is a backlist title, I wouldn't start here, I guess, is where I'm heading with this review. I would definitely start with Small Things Like These, because I think that of the ones that I've read of hers, that's the best that I have read. Okay, now on to the rest of the poetry that was mentioned at the head of the video. So the next book that I finished was I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud and Other Poems You Half Remember from School, which was written by Anna Sampson. So this is a compilation of poems, as it says in the subtitle, that a lot of people might have learnt at school or heard at school, studied in some way. I didn't know all of these poems, but, you know, I grew up in Australia, so potentially some of these are not ones that we kind of commonly would be learning in school, and maybe if you're in the UK or the US, maybe a lot of these will be more familiar to you, but I certainly knew quite a few of them as we went through. And to me, this was quite a fun wander through. It has to be said, mostly English, as in aka British, poetry history. I did like, there were some amusing introductions to some of the poems and poets, which I appreciated. I thought that was quite fun. And yeah, I, generally speaking, really enjoyed this little collection of poems. I didn't tab a lot of them, but that's because, like, of the ones that I resonated with, like, I know them, I've got them tabbed in other poetry collections that I have read before, for example. So the ones that I've tabbed in here would be ones that were a bit more either new to me or ones I haven't read for a long time and I haven't tabbed elsewhere. So yeah, this was very enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a very good little overview. The next poetry collection that I picked up is by an Australian poet called Kate Llewellyn, and this is Figs. And this one came out, I believe, in the 90s, and it was really interesting. 1990. So this is quite an old collection. It's a little, my copy is a bit foxed. Again, this is one that I picked up secondhand. It was either this year or last year. I think it might have been this year. It's one I haven't had for that long, but I decided to give it a go. So I guess one of the things that I'm looking for in a poetry collection that is by one poet, as opposed to a sort of collection that is like an amalgamation of many different poets, is I'm looking for something that kind of holds the collection together, because I think in any collection of poems that you're going to read, you're going to see, there's always going to be highlights, unless it's one that doesn't work for you at all, in which case it doesn't work for you at all. But if, you're going to see poems that you like throughout, and, I've tabbed some in here. But I think as a collection, I'm looking for something that kind of draws it together. And either that's going to be something stylistic or something to do with the topic of the poems, or like there's some kind of thread that goes throughout the collection. And I think for this collection, it was good, but it wasn't, nothing sort of kind of drew it together for me as a collection. At the beginning, there were quite a lot of poems that were about fruit. So I thought, given that it's called Figs, when I say about fruit, I mean starting with fruit and then kind of pulling something of life to do with that, like, relates to and elements of the fruit, and I thought that was going to be kind of the thread, but then that stopped, and then it sort of became about other things. So yeah, I'm just not quite sure that it hangs together as a collection. And in my notes I've written there was some attempt at theme with many poems about fruit, but then it diverges and it kind of doesn't really. Maybe there's a couple later on in the collection that are also about fruit, but yeah, anyway. I enjoyed some of the poems, but as a collection, it didn't really work for me. So I gave this one 3.5 stars. And the very last book that I read in July is another poetry collection that I only just finished on the 30th. And that is Marley by Lulu Houdini. She is a new to me poet. I haven't come across Lulu Houdini's work before, but she is an Aboriginal Australian poet. And this is the first book that I have read this year that was published in 2026. So yeah, I have somehow managed, I've bought a couple of books that were published this year, but I haven't read any of those yet. This is the first one. So I obviously purchased this year, and I've gotten to it this year, which is good for me. What I will say about this collection was that overall I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the way that she played with form and structure throughout. So it had variation in the types of poems that were in there. There were some longer form poems, there were some shorter form poems, there were some kind of like visual poems where and there were also some images included as well, like photographs, and drawings and things like that too. So sometimes there were these sort of like, they're almost like a kind of poetically written story as opposed to, you know, a poem. But then you also had some that were kind of like visually interesting as well. So it kind of varied throughout. Oh yeah, some of them were like on their side as well. Like, so you had to read them that way. So yeah, like visually and like in terms of looking at different ways, different forms, this was very interesting to me. And I think some of the longer form pieces in particular I connected with the most. And like I felt in those longer form poems there was a kind of like a building of something, like where that was not quite the same in the shorter form poems or the like visually interesting poems. In those longer form pieces, it was there was more like energy and feeling built up over the poem. Like it was kind of, it had a narrative flow to it, I guess, to some degree. And to me, those I think were the strongest in the collection. And yeah, so like there was a lot of depth to the poems that were in here, and she touched on quite a few different kind of themes in the poetry. Like some of them were very directly the kinds of themes that you might see in many other Aboriginal poets' collections, like talking about country, talking about, you know, sort of some like cultural elements, and then others it's there in the background, but it's maybe not the focus of the poem. So yeah, like I think as a collection, this one does hold together despite the fact that it has those different things. And I think that's because she's managed to kind of find a flow through the collection. So I think as a collection, this works. And I would have to say that, you know, although I didn't have lots of poems in here, I think I quite enjoyed this overall as a poetry collection. And then there were a few kind of like standout poems to me. And ultimately this sort of felt like a hopeful celebration of life by the end. You know, there was some darker, you know, or more reflective kind of poems occurred earlier on in the collection, but as we sort of get to the end, it's like the hope for the future kind of, that's where we got left. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and it left me in a good place. So I quite enjoyed this overall as a collection, as well as the specific poems. So yeah, so those are my books for the month of July. So it's these ones plus the Elizabeth Strout, Anything is Possible. So yeah, overall this was a good reading month for me, and there were no 5-star books, which is always sad when that happens, but nothing below a 3, and only 1 3. Everything was either a 3.5 or 4-star for me for the rest of the month. And you know, it's interesting sort of having these months where like poetry has kind of come to the fore as the main kind of you know, type of book that I'm reading at the moment, and so we'll see if that continues. I certainly, as I said, have another poetry book on the go. Just before I go, I thought that I might just let you know where I'm up to with what I've got kind of on the go, because if you've been around for a while, you will know a month or two ago, I did a video where I had the books from the Guardian Top 100 Books of All Time, and I picked out ones that were on my shelf to read, that were on my TBR from that list, and I've put them all together on a shelf, which I'm looking at over there. And I had a spinner wheel where I was doing 2 spins, and then I got to pick one of the 2 books that came up in the spin. So the last time we spoke about this, I had spun Beloved by Toni Morrison, and War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And for the last 2 months, I have not told you anything more about what I have been reading, and that is because I decided ultimately to read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, and as you may or may not know, it is quite thick. So I have actually made decent progress through it. I'm currently up to page 197, so that's not too bad. And I'm trying to sort of read at least a chapter a day. It's not always happening. Like, I had a couple of days this week where I couldn't manage it. It's also very heavy, so when I read it at my table with I have this like book rest thing, because I can't read this one in bed. It's just too heavy for my wrists, my delicate wrists. So I have one specific place where I read this book. So you will not be hearing from me about that project for some time, because I still have I'm 12% through the book or something like that. So I think I might be 15% now. So I'm slowly making progress, but this is a long-term project. It's not a quick project. So once I do finish War and Peace, I will spin again and we will continue that project. I also recently told you about a newer project that I have started, which was a video, might have even been the last video that I put up, or the one before that. And that is, I think I called that video something along the lines of reading the Australian canon. And this is where I have gone and sourced a bunch of books that are considered to be classics in the Australian canon, or sort of are following like the history of publishing in this country. And I told you in that video that I was reading The Secret River by Kate Grenville. That's the one that I am still currently reading. I kind of got a little bit stuck on this one. I am now up to page 70 something, I think. Yeah, so I'm up to page 75, which is the beginning of part 2. And I got a little bit stuck in part 1, but I pushed through last night and read a little bit more to finish off that section set in England, which I don't know, it might have just been the sort of setting the scene and like the circumstances of why he's coming to Australia. And this is a character that's coming over as a convict. And yeah, I wasn't having the best time in that first section, but I'm hopeful that as the book continues, I will be getting along with it a lot better. So stay tuned. More to come. Hopefully I will finish that one in the month of August, and I'll be able to report back about it. And I also mentioned in that video that the next book that I'm going to be reading from my big long list is Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey. And I did have a little bit of interest in people wanting to potentially buddy read that with me. So please let me know down in the comments if you would like to do that. I said in that video that I do my buddy reads on the Storygraph. So if that's something that you would be interested in doing, in joining me for a buddy read of, let me know down in the comments and I will add you, or I'll give you the link to it when I get to that. But I won't create that until I finish The Secret River. So I've got to be motivated to get through so that I can get to Oscar and Lucinda, which I'm very excited about. So yeah, that's it for the books I'm currently reading. And just as a little bonus, I have a new game that I'm playing at the moment as a solo game called A Gentle Rain. And I am telling you about this because if you are the kind of person like me who is sometimes when I get onto my phone, I can kind of get stuck playing games in the category that I like to call put the thing in the spot where it belongs. And they're the kind of games that you can sit and you can play for a very, very long time. So this game to me fits in that genre, but it has and it's off your phone, and it's has an arc to it. So essentially you have these little tiles, and you are placing them. I don't know if you remember those puzzles from when we were a kid, where you've got to match this side to this side and kind of like work out how it can all go together. And you are creating this like lake. Is it a lake or a pond? Lake, a quiet lake. And once you have created a square where all of the flowers match, you choose one of the colours that's of the 4 and you put one of these blooms. And basically you're just trying to find a spot for all 8 of the flowers before you run out of tiles. So it's a really good... I've been playing it quite a lot before bed, and I have found it very enjoyable. So if you're like me, the kind of person who is trying to get off your phone a little bit, and you are into those kind of games where you're putting the things in their correct categories, this kind of does that for me in a like offline way. So I've been doing like a couple of rounds of this as I'm closing out my day, and then packing it up and going to bed and doing some reading, and that has improved my bedtime routine out of sight. So I thought I would just mention it because it's a fun little game. And if you're in Australia, I got my copy at Target, so you may be able to find a copy there as well, and there's also plenty of places online, but it's called A Gentle Rain, and I am loving it. Okay, so that's it for my wrap up for the month of July. Let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video. If you're currently reading War and Peace and you need like you need someone to lock in with, let me know. I have a buddy read going on for that as well. So if you're interested in the War and Peace buddy read, which definitely is not a synchronous buddy read, so like if you don't have to be in up to the same spot that I'm up to, then let me know and I can send you the link for that as well. Okay, I'm gonna close out the video here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.